call it hate, cause they're afraid of the people they betrayed. We march with hearts that still believe in the promises they now unweave. They wave the flag and twist the truth, sell our future, steal our youth. But the streets now hum with liberty's song, for we've been quiet way too long. We dissent for the dream they sold and broke, for every word the liars spoke. We dissent for the truth they twist and bend. We won't let the story end. We dissent for the love of this land, not their greed, not their command. We dissent cause freedom's not their toy, and we won't let them destroy. They weaponize the law like kings, turn justice into puppet strings. They say be silent, stay in line, while they rob the public blind. But courage don't come from a throne, it lives in voices not their own. The power's ours, it always was, and we'll rise again because we dissent for the flag they claim to own, for the truth that we've outgrown. We dissent for the rights they try to kill, for the fire that burns still. We dissent for the soldiers, teachers, kin, for the fight we're still within. We dissent not out of hate but care, for the soul that's still out there. They can smear, they can sneer, but the people persevere. Every chant, every sign is America in its prime. From Selma to Stonewall to today, our descent is the American way. We dissent for the light they dim with lies, for the hope they demonize. We dissent for the heart of the free, for what it means to we the people, not me. We stand, we shout, we pray, till justice has its day. We dissent, and we will not relent, cause loving freedom means we dissent. Cause loving freedom means we dissent. Cause loving America means we dissent.
Good morning. That's a nice mic. My name is Taylor Chadwick, and I am a member of the Board of Trustees. Of this congregation. Welcome to all of you. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Elkhart is a welcoming community encouraging religious freedom, nurturing individual, spiritual, and ethical growth, celebrating diversity, and promoting a just and sustainable world. If you would like to learn more about this fellowship, please ask anyone wearing a name badge with any questions you may have. You may also check out our website at uufe.org. You are all welcome to join us after the service in the gathering place for coffee and fellowship. For the listening enjoyment of all, we ask at this time to please set your phones on silent. Also, if you need hearing support, please ask for help at the sound desk at the rear of the sanctuary. Was there more announcements? He's out today.
I guess not.
Uh,
There is up here. You may be good. I don't see anything. You're good.
he did email me announcements, but I can do them later when I pull them up on my phone. Okay, thank you. Hey, we did better this time.
Yes, Steve messaged me this morning. Karen is ill and he's staying with her. Good morning. Thank you for coming out on this cold and snowy day. Before we get started today, I want to take a minute to just chat with you. As many of you know and have heard that I've had some medical issues the past couple of weeks. I spent a total of 9 days in the hospital receiving treatment for acute shortness of breath. But I'm doing a lot better now. I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, which is a scary word, but it's not as dire as it sounds. My heart did not fail or is not failing. All it means is that my left ventricle isn't pumping as efficiently as it should, which is causing fluid to back up into my lungs, kind of like a backup sewer. And that fluid in the lungs is what's causing the shortness of breath. So they gave me lots of diuretics and Lasix and helped drain all that fluid out, so I'm breathing easier. They sent me home with oxygen, but I'm finding every day I'm doing a little better. For the most part, I don't need it during the day, although I do have a tank with me here. I also have this handy dandy oximeter. And so I promise you I will be testing regularly, and if I see a drop, I will get my tank, but I prefer to preach without it. So I have a good treatment plan, lots of support from family and friends. So rest assured, I'm okay. I'm not going anywhere. You don't need to plan about what to do with Reverend Dan. I do appreciate your concern, but I'm managing just fine, and I'm fully capable of performing as your minister. However, if you do have any concerns or questions, I would appreciate it if you would talk with me directly, and not resort to either gossiping or going to other people with your questions or concerns. This kind of direct communication about going to that person is what our covenant of right relations really calls us to do. So I want to be transparent with you all, but I expect the same courtesy in return. So with that, let's continue. So this morning, I want to lift up our monthly theme of resistance and apply it to the injustices currently being inflicted on marginalized people by our own government, drawing on the teachings and wisdoms of Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., and Saul Alinsky. When I say marginalized people, I mean brown people, black people, Asian people, Jewish people, trans people, and many others whose lives and dignity are too often treated as expendable. This sermon was inspired by Mike Puro's purchase of the Choose Your Own sermon topic at our last auction, so you can blame him. But what Mike did was he shared a fascinating article by Walter Wink with me that offers a fresh perspective on how Jesus and Alinsky understood resistance to authoritarian injustice. So that article forms the foundation for my sermon today. So as we work our way through this service together, I ask that you listen for something to hold on to, something that can empower you to resist these authoritarian actions in your own way and not succumb to indifference or silence. This will not be a light and fluffy service. It has meat. And I anticipate that it will run a little long, and I'm okay with that because this is important. But I hope that it also feeds your spirit in a new way. So I begin with these words. We gather this morning not because the world is simple, but because it is complicated. We gather not because justice is easy, but because it is necessary. We come carrying questions, convictions, doubts, and hopes, trusting that truth does not require perfection, only courage. Here we practice listening deeply. Here we practice telling the truth. Here we practice choosing love that refuses to look away. So come and let us worship together.
Our chalice lighting this morning was written by Reverend Dan. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light that guides us when the path is uncertain. A light for courage when silence feels safer. A light for compassion that does not yield to cruelty. A light for hope, not the passive hope that waits, but the active hope that chooses. May this flame remind us that faith is not meant to make us comfortable, but to make us faithful. In deference to the oxygen tank. Would you speak the UUFE covenant, unison covenant with me? It's in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit as we sing our opening hymn. And I'm not sure how Reverend Dan is going to take over for Steve Kripe, thank goodness. We do not want me singing it. We're going to sing it once all together and then twice as a round. Thank you.
So in the recording that we have, Lizzie's going to play the whole tune once through, then we'll sing it together, and then we'll split here to do the round, okay? Now I'll cue you in. So I want to tell you a very short story. There once was a neighborhood that prided itself on being peaceful. People waved to one another, they kept their lawns neat, they minded their own business, they were orderly, and they shunned change. But most important of all, they avoided confrontation. It was a very nice neighborhood by all accounts, and for a long time that felt like a virtue. But over the years, certain things began to happen. Someone saw that a neighbor had been treated unfairly at work. Someone else was harassed on the street. And then a family quietly disappeared from the block. People noticed. People always noticed. But they never questioned. It was not their place, after all, to question or to go against the grain. Besides, they thought, we don't know the whole story. We don't want to make the situation worse. We'll just mind our own business. It's wise not to stir the pot because that makes us uncomfortable, and we prefer peace. So they stayed quiet. Well, one evening, a newcomer asked a simple question at a neighborhood meeting. He said, I know it's very calm and peaceful here, and that truly is a delight. But what do people here do when something is wrong? I mean, this place can't always be peaceful, can it? The room went still. Finally, someone said, well, we try to keep the peace. We practice kindness. We turn the other cheek. We disavow conflict. It's best to maintain the things the way they are instead of risking our peace. So the newcomer nodded and he said, I see. So peace here means no one questions, no one challenges, no one has to be uncomfortable, and no one argued. Because everyone recognized themselves in those words because they were the truth. They were afraid to name unfairness, injustice, or intolerance when they noticed them because doing so would require them to do something about the noticing. It would be an inconvenience. It would be scary, and no one wanted that. So even though co-workers continued to be mistreated, more people were harassed on the streets, and more families quietly disappeared on the block. They did nothing until there was no one left to keep the peace. Stories like this don't have villains. They have customs, they have traditions. And sometimes the most dangerous custom of all is calling silence by the name of kindness. And once silence is mistaken for kindness, injustice rarely needs to shout. And that's what we're talking about today. So at this time, I invite our kids to go to their class while we do our fourth Sunday camp.
This week is the fourth Sunday of the month, and so we light our fourth Sunday candle. We recognize the joys and sorrows of the global community. All that is shared today comes from beyond ourselves, whether from the other side of the county or the other side of the world. These events affect us indirectly by impacting the world we live in. This practice helps to keep us conscious of events outside of UUFE, to bring and keep our awareness of losses and gifts, pain and beauty from beyond ourselves, and allows us to bear witness. If you would like to share something, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone over for you. But just briefly speak about the event or the situation that is concerning you. And if you're a person who has a question for the person who brings up a certain topic, please wait and ask them during coffee hour. Please do be very brief, hold personal sharings for third Sundays, and avoid politically charged events as we may each value those things differently. It says I'm to tell of an appropriate blessing, but I think we've got enough things going on in our world that we won't have trouble coming up with things this morning.
Hopefully this isn't too politically concerning, but I do want to say some joy for a drag show that happened in Goshen last night that was sold out to capacity. And despite the fact that there were protesters outside, didn't dissuade anyone from not attending. In fact, it may have actually helped promote the event. So I was very happy. And I bartended at the event. It was a lot of fun. So.
A drag show. Well, I'd like to mention all the people south and east of us who have lost their power.
Speaking of lost power, we have people in the capital of Ukraine who've been without power for more than 2 weeks due to their energy grid being knocked out in what is obviously a very rough winter.
I think we have to remember the situation in Minnesota. I can't think of the name of the city now. But the killing of the young man yesterday, which was a terrible, terrible event. He was trying to help a woman, and he died.
The names of those in Minnesota are Renee Good and Alex Pretty.
Good for all of us to remember that our troubles are generally pretty small. May light and warmth come to all who both need and bring it. May we grow in awareness of our global community and our care of it. And may we ever be grateful for all that we have been given. Now please remain seated as we sing hymn number 354, We Laugh, We Cry. And we're going to sing verses 1 and 4 only. Our offering this morning is going to be shared with Woodlawn Nature Center. And I want you to enjoy this video interlude while the offering is being collected. It was written by Aileen Vance, and it is performed by Leah Morris.
Morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
There is no freedom, the wise man said, let justice roll down, when the poor cry out for shelter and bread, let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Hatred will never drive out hate. Let love roll down, roll down. Remember, our hearts can make us great. Let love roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let your love roll down like a mighty stream. When brutality threatens our daughters and sons, let peace roll down, roll down. May our voices rise up louder than the guns. Let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. And let peace roll down like a mighty stream. Step by step, one by one, let justice roll down, roll down. They can kill the prophet, but the dream lives on. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream. Oh, children, don't you get weary, walk together, believe in the dream. When the way gets rough, we'll make a new way. Let justice roll down like a mighty stream.
Wow, beautiful. I have a reading today that is 3 different excerpts from the letter from Birmingham jail, which those of us who grew up during that era remember very well. It was by Martin Luther King Jr., and of course he was imprisoned in the Birmingham jail. These are his words. First, I must confess that over the last few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, But I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a, quote, more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. In your statement, you asserted that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But can this assertion be logically made? Isn't this like condemning the robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth and his philosophical delvings precipitated the misguided popular mind to make him drink the hemlock? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never-ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see, as federal courts have consistently affirmed, that it is immoral to urge an individual to withdraw his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest precipitates violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. The second excerpt. I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much. I guess I should have realized that few members of a race that has oppressed another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and passionate yearnings of those that have been oppressed. And still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. They are still all too small in quantity, but they are big in quality. And this is the third excerpt. I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth of time. I received a letter this morning from a white brother in Texas, which said, quote, all Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but is it possible that you are in too great of a religious hurry? It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth, end quote. All that is said here grows out of a tragic misconception of time. It is the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. I'm coming to feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation.
There's a version of faith that asks very little of us. It asks us to be nice. It asks us to be patient. It asks us to avoid conflict and trust that somehow things will work themselves out. That version of faith is comforting. It keeps the peace. It allows us to feel moral without feeling disrupted. And in moments like this, it becomes deeply dangerous. Because we are living in a time when injustice is no longer subtle. It is no longer hidden in the shadow or disguised behind polite language. It is increasingly visible, increasingly normalized, and increasingly defended by those in power. And when injustice reaches that point, faith stops being about what we believe and becomes about what we are willing to resist. Today I want to talk about 3 figures who understood that difference with painful clarity. Jesus of Nazareth, Saul Alinsky, and Martin Luther King Jr. At first glance, that might sound like an odd combination. A first-century Jewish dissident, a 20th century community organizer, and a Baptist preacher who became the moral conscience of a nation. But they are bound together by a shared truth. Faith that refuses to confront injustice eventually serves it. I'm going to repeat that. Faith that refuses to confront injustice eventually serves it. One of the great misunderstandings about Jesus is that he taught people to quietly submit to injustice. We hear familiar phrases. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. Give them your cloak as well. And they are often preached as instructions in endurance, as if Jesus were saying, accept whatever harm comes your way. Don't make trouble. Don't resist. But that interpretation collapses the moment we place Jesus back into his historical reality. Jesus lived under Roman occupation. His people were taxed heavily, policed brutally, and publicly humiliated. Violence was not exceptional, it was routine. Roman power was enforced not just through force, but through shame and domination. So when Jesus taught these sayings, he was not offering spiritual platitudes. He was offering nonviolent resistance strategies to people who were already being harmed. For example, in Jesus' time, a slap on the cheek was not a fist fight. It was an insult, often delivered by the back of a Roman hand, a way to assert dominance and reinforce hierarchy. Think about it. If you're facing a Roman soldier, and what does he do? He hits you on the right cheek with his right hand, right? To turn the other cheek was to not invite more abuse. It was to refuse humiliation. It forced the aggressor to confront the humanity of the person they were trying to reduce. It disrupted the expected script. It created an uncomfortable moment where power was exposed rather than obeyed. This was not weakness. It was dignity asserted without violence. Additionally, Roman soldiers could legally force civilians to carry their gear for 1 mile, no more. That law existed to remind occupied people who was in charge. So when Jesus said, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go a second, he was not saying be helpful. He was saying, expose the injustice of the system by refusing to play your assigned role. Because a soldier who allowed a civilian to go a second mile would himself be violating Roman law and risk punishment. So the power dynamic would flip. The system would be revealed as arbitrary and coercive. Again, this is not submission. This is creative, courageous resistance. And then there's the teaching that we almost never sit with seriously. If someone sues you for your coat, give them your cloak as well. Well, for a poor person in Jesus' time, often the only clothing they owned was a coat and a cloak. And the cloak was not an accessory, it was a survival tool. It gave warmth at night. And it was often the only possession the law explicitly protected from seizure. So to give up your coat was one thing, but to give up your cloak as well meant standing exposed, literally naked. So Jesus is not romanticizing suffering here. He's making a shocking point. If a system is so unjust that it strips people of everything, then expose it. Let the shame fall where it belongs, not on the person being stripped, but on the system doing the stripping, because back in that time, being naked was an extreme embarrassment, not for the person, but for the people who caused the nakedness. So, Jesus did not teach compliance. He taught resistance that refused to mirror the violence of the oppressor. And that's why he was dangerous. It's also important to be clear about why Jesus was killed. It wasn't simply because he preached love or kindness. Rome had no particular problem with personal virtue. What Rome could not tolerate was a vision of justice that challenged its authority. Jesus didn't just teach loving kindness, he preached justice, and it wasn't Rome's justice, it was God's justice. He proclaimed that the kingdom of God was at hand, and in his world, that was not a metaphor. Many of Jesus' contemporaries understood him as an apocalyptic Jewish prophet, someone that announced that God was about to intervene in human history to correct a world that had gone badly awry. The first would be last, the humble would be exalted, those who had benefited from domination and exploitation would not always remain on the top. That message was electrifying to the poor and deeply unsettling to those in power. Because Rome's justice was about order, control, and hierarchy. Jesus' vision of God's justice was about restoration, equity, and dignity. And guess what? Those two visions could not coexist peacefully. So Jesus was punished. Not because he was violent, but because he was threatening. He was threatening to power, threatening to control, threatening to a way of life built on domination and fear. Jesus' execution was not a tragic misunderstanding. It was an act of state violence meant to eliminate a perceived threat. And that pattern did not end with Jesus. Again and again, those with power respond to perceived threats not with humility or reform, but with punishment and violence, especially when that threat comes from people labeled other. We see this in the unjust killing of African Americans by police. in the rise of anti-Asian, anti-Semitic, anti-brown violence, and the epidemic of violence and discrimination against trans people. At our borders, where immigrants and refugees are killed, detained, or allowed to die for the crime of wanting a better life. And violence is not the only tool of domination. We see it in mass incarceration, in the rise of white supremacist movements, in political rhetoric that thrives on fear and division. None of this is accidental, guys. Again and again, violence grows out of the same root. People with power fearing the loss of that power and the end of their way of life. Like the Romans, modern power holders find it easier to eliminate the threat rather than to examine their own selves. Never mind that Jesus taught otherwise. Never mind that love and justice were his central message. Power, dominance, and control still too often trump compassion and equity. So Jesus was not executed for being nice. He was executed because he challenged the economic exploitation, the religious hypocrisy, and the imperial authority. And when he overturned the tables in the temple, he confronted an economy that enriched elites by exploiting the poor in God's name. And that moment sealed his fate. So we know the state does not kill people for preaching love. It kills people who refuse to stay in their place. And that brings us to now. Because recently in Minneapolis, Renee Good was murdered by an ICE agent. And just yesterday, Alex Preddy was also murdered. And I use the word murdered intentionally. 2 human beings are dead, and state violence caused their deaths. And the administration has chosen to defend the agents rather than to grieve the loss of their lives or to seek accountability. When the state kills and then shields itself, faith does not get to hide behind careful language anymore. Jesus knew that pattern, and so did Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just echo Jesus. He translated Jesus for us. He took teachings that had been spiritualized and softened and dragged them back into public life and relevance. King understood that to turn the other cheek was not a call to quiet suffering. It was a refusal to cooperate with humiliation. He understood that loving your enemies did not mean excusing injustice, but confronting it without surrendering your soul. And like Jesus, King understood something else. When injustice is backed by the power of the state, it will always demand patience from those it harms. Always. That is why King rejected the language of wait. That is why he said there comes a time when silence becomes betrayal. That is why he insisted that nonviolent resistance must create tension. Not because tension is the goal, but because justice never arrives without it. King did not believe that the role of religion was to calm the nation. He believed it was to awaken it. And that belief put him squarely beside Jesus and directly into our path today. King condemned police brutality. He named white supremacy. He opposed the Vietnam War, calling the United States the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. From a Birmingham jail cell, he warned that the greatest obstacle to justice was not the extremist, but the white moderate who preferred order over justice and peace over truth. King understood that injustice does not need hatred to survive. It only needs silence from those not directly harmed. And like Jesus, King paid for that clarity with his life. And y'all, this is not an abstract concept for me either. Because I know in my bones what it feels like when systems decide your life is negotiable. When your dignity depends on the mood of the people in power. And when the rules shift depending on who you are and who is watching. As a trans person, I have lived through years where my very existence was debated as if it were a policy question instead of a human one. I have watched politicians talk about people like me as threats, as problems, something to be controlled or eliminated rather than understood. I, by the simple virtue of being who I am, have been even labeled by the current administration as a domestic terrorist. Seriously? Why? It's because they perceive me and people like me as a threat to their ideas of what a model American should look like. They perceive us as a threat to their way of life. And what has been most chilling has not been the cruelty, the hate, and the prejudice in and of themselves. What has been most chilling has been how quickly those things have become normalized. Still, some people easily say, well, that's just politics. It's complicated. We don't know the full story. We should just wait and see. But I've learned this the hard way. When people in power start deciding whose lives matter less, waiting is not neutral. It is dangerous. That's why I cannot soften my language about Renee Good and Alex Preddy, because I too recognize that pattern. Just like Jesus. That's why Jesus did not preach just love. He practiced disruption. MLK recognized it. That's why he refused to wait. And so, as we've learned from Jesus and King, there are many forms of resistance. So now a reasonable question arises. What does resistance actually look like in practice in our time? Well, that question is where Saul Alinsky enters the conversation. Alinsky makes people of faith uncomfortable, not because he lacked ethics, but because he refused abstraction. He insisted that moral outrage without organization changes little. Moral outrage without organization changes little. Born in 1909 to Jewish immigrant parents in Chicago, Alinsky grew up amid poverty, labor exploitation, and political corruption. He encountered injustice not as theory, but as a daily reality. Alinsky believed deeply in democracy, but he did not romanticize it. He believed that democracy only functions when ordinary people have real leverage, not symbolic voice, not polite access, but actual power. Alinsky forces us to face a hard truth. Good intentions do not restrain unjust systems. Polite disagreement does not slow them down. Moral clarity without leverage changes very little. And his most famous insight is very blunt. Power concedes nothing without pressure. Not violence, pressure. Organized resistance, refusal to cooperate with injustice. And here is where Alinsky quietly aligns with both Jesus and King. He believes systems that rely on fear, silence, and compliance must be disrupted, not out of hatred, but out of responsibility. So Jesus exposed injustice and refused to sanctify it. King mobilized conscience and made complacency uncomfortable. Alinsky organized power and insisted that injustice be confronted where it actually operates. So we've seen how all three have rejected violence that destroys human dignity, and how they very clearly rejected passivity that allows injustice to proceed unchallenged. So the question before us is not whether we believe in justice. Most of us do. The question is whether we're willing to do the work that justice requires. To organize, to persist, to accept discomfort, to apply pressure where silence once lived. If we want the world to change, we cannot rely on hope alone. We cannot rely on good thoughts. So I believe our responsibility is clear. We must resist the current tides of injustice, not with rage, although many of us want to rage. Not with rage, not with cruelty, not with dehumanization, and specifically not with sentiment, good wishes, or lofty words. We must force ourselves out of our complacency and actually do something to disrupt the current trends of injustice we are facing as a nation. Now, I know a great many of us in this room aren't up to go protesting in the streets, lobbying at the State House, or other strenuous activities. I get that. But almost all of us can do something. We could write letters to the editor of our newspapers. We can vote. We can get others to vote. We can contact our senators and representatives and voice our concerns. We can support marginalized people and be a voice for them. We can call out injustices when and where we see them. We can do any number of things, but we can't keep silent anymore. Not someday. In the end, we must decide where we will apply pressure, who we will stand with, and what we are no longer willing to cooperate with. Not someday. Now. And may that be so. So I realized that was pretty heavy. So as we process that, I'm going to welcome you all into a spirit of prayer. Now, as we try to decompress after this message, let us come together now in a spirit of prayer, however we understand that word. Holding both the ache of this world and the hope we refuse to surrender. We give thanks for the courage that has always risen among ordinary people when injustice tried to pass itself off as inevitable. We give thanks for teachers and truth tellers, for Jesus who showed us that love does not mean submission to harm, for Martin Luther King Jr., who reminded us that waiting is not neutral when lives are on the line, for Saul Alinsky, who taught that justice requires not only conscience, but organized courage. Today, we also name our grief. We grieve the lives of Renee Good and Alex Pretty. We grieve all who have been killed by systems more invested in control than in compassion. We grieve lives lost to racism, xenophobia, transphobia, and violence justified as order. We hold close those who mourn. We ask to strengthen those who are afraid. Protect those whose bodies and lives are treated as disposable. And for those of us who still have choices, still have voices, still have room to act, please give us the wisdom to know when silence has become betrayal. Give us the humility to listen to those most harmed. And give us the courage to resist without losing our humanity. May our faith be more than sentiment. May our hope be more than optimism. And may we learn again and again how to choose love that refuses to be silent. Amen. Blessed be. And now to rise in a more uplifting manner to end our service, we'll sing hymn 121, We'll Build a Land, verses 1, 2, and 4. Remember that we substitute the words sisters and brothers in the chorus with all of the people. Please rise. And let's sing in full voice. All right, sing it as if you mean it. Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As you go from this place, may you carry courage that stays present, humility that listens deeply, and resolve grounded in love that refuses to turn away. May you leave not with all the answers, but with enough clarity to keep going, enough compassion to remain human, and enough hope to choose faithfulness again. Go in peace.